Session.
Okay, great. We have started.
Wonderful. So today we will be talking about some of the research that we've been doing, Nina Davis and I, Jorge Poveda, and we have entitled this presentation, "It's Not Dance, It's Data, the Translucent Ownership of Steps Afforded by Crypto and the Emergence of a New Digital Sociability or Sociality." And so very briefly, I just wanted to announce some of the contents that we will be going through in this presentation. We are thinking, we will be discussing fractional ownership, the commodification of culture, and the transaction-based dynamic of blockchain architectures, which have been already mapped out for the visual arts and cryptocurrencies. But we were thinking after a pandemic that has pulled dance practitioners out of the physical dance floor and into virtual spaces, we were thinking how blockchain architectures paired with new digitization technologies had spawned three key aspects that we will be discussing today. First, a reshaped sense of sociality or sociability through online presence. Second, the revision of the notion of ownership of steps. And third, the hybridization of dance and data as a new medium for disembodied creativity.
Great. Do you want to move over to me?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So just before we get into everything, I just want to introduce Jorge and I and how we started working together. And I'm going to take us through, or this is, I guess, part of the presentation of taking you through what our journey has been and how we've kind of got to the point right now of us sitting here and presenting to you, just so you can follow it. And the sort of, yeah. So I'm an artist, a visual artist working mostly with moving image, but also the subject of a lot of my work is dance. And about maybe 3 years ago, I had become kind of quite fascinated by both um, Fortnite, or I guess we had been interested in Fortnite before, but hadn't actually done anything about it, about people kind of starting to dance on the streets and doing these sort of weird little dance snippets that everyone seemed to recognize what they were. I didn't play the game Fortnite. And then I became interested in TikTok and thinking about what was happening to dance in these online and social spaces. And then kind of dug a little bit deeper and found out about some court cases or some dancers taking Fortnite to court for the use of their steps, and kind of the presentation is about that, but that's kind of like that's how I got sucked in. And I made a sort of video essay, which I'm just about to show you, called "Express Yourself on the Battlefield," which kind of looks at how the body has the dancing body has become a commodity, and it really takes you quite slowly through it. But when I made this, I think it was maybe like 2 weeks after I'd made it or something like that, I came across Jorge's work, a symposium or a webinar series that Jorge was putting on. And I read Jorge's bio, and Jorge was looking at some really similar things, was looking at the Fortnite cases from more of an angle of the protection of traditional knowledges. And that was something that I'd been interested in as well, but wasn't making work about it. So I just reached out on a whim and was like, you need to watch my video. So without further ado, I will show us the video. Why is it not going? Oh, next slide. Okay, so that would be the slide where I have the link. I'm just going to test this out really quickly. Can you hear it?
No, but does it have audio already? It shouldn't, right?
Hmm?
Does it include audio already? Oh, yeah, it does.
Yeah,
No,
it does. That's fine. Okay, I'm just going to put a link then. That's fine.
but wait, I think it's because you didn't choose the appropriate option to share the screen because did you tick that box that says also share audio from my computer?
No.
That's it. So whenever you're
Let's
sharing your screen, you're gonna see that
share
at the
sound.
bottom. Yes, that's it.
Oh.
And now I'll tell you if
And now
it's
you'll tell me my password. Ugh. Okay, I'm just gonna. Can you see my screen?
yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, I'll fix that later.
The what?
I have to like close Zoom and reinstall it or something.
Okay.
Um,
Do you want to play the video to see if it's sounding okay?
no, I can't click the sound option until I
Ah,
reinstall Zoom. So I'll just do that later.
right. Okay.
Um,
Good.
okay. Welcome back. Thanks for watching the video. Um, uh, so let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so I'll pass over to Jorge, who at the time was sort of also thinking about this split of the body and mind.
Right, right, right. So during that time that I was contacting Nina, that I got to know Nina's work, I was also doing my master's in dance anthropology. And there I got familiar with this prominent model to study dance based on Professor Egil Bacca and Professor Georgiana Gore and Professor Gediminas Karolis, who these people are people that I look up to, that I admire their work, but the model that they came up with to study dance was conflicting for me because it seemed to be ratifying this Cartesian division of mind and body. And I remember that they were like piggybacking on this whole cognitive wave and in the humanities and dance anthropology in itself to claim that dance is split between a concept and a realization, and saying that we dance anthropologists or any person that is interested in researching dance, we can only get access to the realization of a dance, but there's always this other abstract level, well, this immaterial constellation of notions or concepts or images that it's kind of like floating among and above the people, the communities of practitioners. And I thought that that model was imprecise because it seemed to be suggesting that dance is already fully formed somewhere in our minds in this abstract space, and that we only needed to kind of like double click it to so that our bodies will finally enact it and just put forward and bring into the reality this file of the completed dance that was already previously there allocated. And I thought, after looking at these new iterations of dance that we are analyzing today, of dance in the digital space and dance after being digitized, after being recorded through motion capture and now being sold and circulated as pieces of data, now I think that that model has regained relevance. And I think that model, that even though was not intended to describe these new iterations of data that resembles dance, it's actually portraying very well the situation, because in these new platforms, on the metaverse, on the video games, when you can sell and buy these portions, these emotes, these portions of choreography, the transmission is not between a human and another human, but rather it's a transmission of data between machines. And we as humans, we are not necessarily learning how to do that dance, but it's now it is that fully formed file that we can offer to our avatars to perform accurately. So that is kind of like the train of thought that I was having, coming from a background of dance anthropology and seeing those methods that I used to struggle with regaining relevance to describe these new iterations of dance.
Yeah, and we sort of spoke about the other day about this sort of idea of like, are you? We had a question of like, if you're not actually physically dancing, does it mean you're dancing? So like, what does this idea of like pressing a button and it initiating some form of dance, but you just sit there. What's the how does that change our perception of dancing? And we spoke really briefly about Catherine Hale's idea of cognitive assemblages and how part of human evolution it's sort of in a deep state of symbiosis with technology now. And I feel like this sort of, maybe it's not a necessarily state of cognition, but the fact that dancing is a form of thinking as opposed to, or I mean, I don't know whether I want to call it thinking, but dancing isn't necessarily a physical thing. It's a sort of like a mind experience, is a really clear, maybe not clear, but it could be used as an example of what a cognitive assemblage might look like. That now dancing doesn't necessarily mean that it is about the body. It can now be about something else.
Right, and it's of course the caveat that I have for myself when I'm talking about these things is that I am running on the risk of being a fundamentalist of dance, because I what I'm saying is that then what we have in here is data and it's not dance anymore, right? So what we're saying is that this is data that it's resembling or that it's being rendered as dance, but not in a belittling way. Like these new iterations of dance is what I'm interested in. I'm actually studying them, and something that it's pulling my attention. But I do think that it's relevant to like make those distinctions of like these are separate phenomena with resonances, with actual implications for the sociality of people and how people engage with one another. But it's a different kind of phenomenon, right?
Yeah, and I think something's totally shifted. Like it's almost like this Cartesian idea of the mind and body split. It's almost like that, those things that you were initially thinking about when you first were introduced to these ideas. Now, as where we've got to with our work, it's almost so clear that even that argument like almost doesn't make sense anymore, because it's so entangled with each other. Like what is the real thing and what's not. But of course, in terms of, which we'll go into in a second, sort of looking at dance as in the digital sphere as a product, we do need to say that this is a different thing, but the experience of it is something new, basically. So on to the next one. So after we kind of came together and met, and had some really enthusiastic Zoom meetings, we were like, hey, we should write a paper together. So we kind of we wrote this paper, which was published, was it a year ago or was it 2 years ago?
Yeah, 2021. So 1 year ago.
And it was called Dancing Someone Else's Movements Using Someone Else's Body. And so like Express Yourself on the Battlefield, it kind of started with just a brief description of what the issue is with the commodification of the dancing body in online spaces. Jorge did a section that introduced some of your work looking at protecting, oh sorry, I've lost the word, kind of forms of a different what was it, not indigenous, is it, what do you call it, indigenous
Traditional dances, indigenous
traditional forms of knowledge and sort of traditional dances. There it is. And then to kind of get away from this like doom and gloom that we were both stuck in with it, of sort of being like, this is horrible, like these cases have been brought to court and they've all lost, and it can feel a bit like, well, that's crap. But we were kind of like, maybe we should look towards maybe a possible more like hopeful future for dancers, and how maybe they could regain agency within this new digital economy, where dances are products, and because it's clear that these kind of tech mega lords, these big companies hold a monopoly, and if you don't have access to this technology. Like, what do you do? And none of us do because we can't. Anyways, so we set out three speculative courses of action. One was probably the wackiest one that we came up with. Was we wondered whether we could protect dance as under source code copyright law. So every node that is put on the body has like a X, Y, Z, three sets of X, Y, Z numbers, which over the course of a certain amount of time moves around, and so those coordinates change. So each node will have like a score of like three scores, and that produces loads of code. And we were wondering whether that could be protected. So whether dance is, I guess we're looking at dance as data and whether it can be protected as that, as opposed to a choreographic work.
And I think very
Yeah.
quickly, I think it is important what you're saying, because it's like exemplifying or illustrating why it is important to keep those distinctions. Because honestly, it is important for me to specify that it's not that I'm saying it is not dance in a belittling way. It's more like it's not a dance, so therefore, what is it? And by acknowledging what it is, maybe we can creatively come up with new strategies to protect it better. Because if you maintain the notion that yes, it look well, I see bodies moving, so this got to be a dance, you're gonna fall into the trap of like framing it that way, and also trying to protect it in the way that a dance should be protected, which is under the category a choreographic creation. But we already know, based on like all the lawsuits that failed to obtain any retribution from Epic Games, that that legislation of that category is actually not protecting these iterations of dance, right?
Yeah, exactly. And well, and also we had this other thing of, like dances that are it's common that, well, I think I mentioned it in the film, especially on the battlefield, but certain dances are too short to be protected under choreographic copyright law. And I guess once you expand it into this huge score of coordinates, you'll see that actually these movements are quite complex. You'd be copywriting something pretty finite, but nonetheless they are very complex movements that are pages and pages of coordinates. And so those were in our paper, those were sort of broken down into two sections, but they kind of go hand in hand. I mean, all three of these actually go hand in hand. As we've kind of moved on with our research, we've kind of come to realize that these could all work together and would be more robust if they did. But so our third one is we were wondering whether blockchain could provide some sort of proof of ownership of a dance. So when you create an NFT or when you mint an NFT, it creates a timestamp, and that timestamp could show that, like, be proof of your ownership. So it might not prove it when you're taking Fortnite to court, but it wouldn't be like actual proof, but it could be a form of evidence in a case to be like, well, I created it at this point. Of course, blockchain would have to be completely standardized for it to be like the law, and it's not at the moment. And also we were looking at blockchain for its sort of horizontal form of ownership and sharing resources amongst communities and having sort of joint ownership over products, because that was another part of what we were looking at, which was some dances that are not necessarily owned by one person and they're owned by communities. How can you how can you kind of how can that be represented, basically?
Just a housekeeping thing, we have 10 more
Mhm.
minutes before the 25-minute mark.
Oh, I've got 5 minutes. Okay.
Oh,
Okay. So really quickly, I'm just going to show you this little. So we made a so maybe I won't show stepping into machine then. We decided to adopt fiction as a method in our work, and we wanted to test out blockchain. Basically, that was our next step. We are like, let's try and put this into practice. Let's test it. And so we decided that firstly we were like, oh, let's try and work with a traditional dancer, and then we kind of thought, well, maybe we shouldn't put someone's dance into these systems without really knowing what they are. So we decided to create a fictional dance together, which would operate as our sort of guinea pig. We have more to say, but as we're running out of time, I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay.
right.
So with with that fictional dance that I made called Bionic Step, I'll put a link to the video in the chat in case anyone wants to see the video. So in terms of making a fictional dance, it existed in a world that made this dance traditional and relate have kind of it was bestowed with sort of traditional knowledges of the time and the people and everything like that. And that's sort of what the video is if you'd like to watch it at another time. So we made this dance to test out, and we decided that this was Jorge's idea, so I don't want to take credit for this. To run a short course at the University of Ghent, where I'm like Jorge, chime in if you want me to. Where we wanted to invite specific speakers in to just to learn a bit more about blockchain and kind of share these ideas with a larger group of people, and sort of almost it be like a series of talks, but also a think tank to be like, hey, like what about this?
Right. Oh my
Let's
God.
speak to some
And something that,
experts.
yeah,
Mm.
and something that became salient for me is like to have like this illustration of all these cases and all these artists that are already minting their own NFTs based on emotes or 3D representations of their dance steps or choreographies or playing video recordings of their choreographies. So by seeing all these artists and communities that are arising of dancers within the blockchain, I started thinking of like what kind of sociality is arising from this. And these are pragmatic communities of people sharing this data, appreciating this data, and also selling and buying this data, right? So in Fortnite, at a time, you have simultaneously at almost any given point of the day, 3.5 million people connected in Fortnite, playing the video game, performing those emotes, these dance steps through their avatars, but you also have like um, NFT sized version of those steps also circulating in other platforms and other metaverses. Um, for example, the Central Land has 56,000 monthly logged in users. And within that platform, not only that you can purchase and buy emotes, but you can also have an NFT certifying that you own it. So that for me became salient. That for us became an important aspect of the whole situation, how ownership is at the core of this community, and how by creating these NFTs and like and embedding your dance or your embodied creativity into the blockchain, you are also putting forward your intention to own it and to attach your name to it. And so, as Nina explained, these are paralegal strategies to claim stewardship of or ownership of your creativity, because having an NFT does not equate to having a copyright registration for the same content. Nevertheless, it is putting within this community of practitioners the notion that there's this person attached through the NFTs and through the blockchain to this particular sequence or movement. And it is not the first time that communities of dancers are trusting or confiding in paralegal strategies to reinforce or put forward or decide how their creativity is circulating. because back in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, the African American community of tap dancers and jazz dancers in New York City, they were already reinforcing the stewardship and remaining vigilant of how much of the dance steps were being copied in each other's performances. And this is something that has been recovered by Anthea Crowd in her paper Stealing Steps. And the main point in that paper is that she's claiming that even though some of these communities, like this one that I just mentioned, are operating outside of the copyright regimes or intellectual property regimes, nevertheless, they are effectively having a saying in the way in which their creativity, their embodied creativity is circulating. So I'm seeing, or we are seeing the same situation here with Dance on the Blockchain, with people minting their NFTs that, as we said, does not equate to having a copyright, but it's nevertheless effectively at putting forward that notion of I am the person behind this dance step, which is something that we also did experimentally with this fictional dance, right?
Yeah, exactly. And also there's something, oh, actually, no, it's not important. I was going to say something like the financialization of the body, but actually I think yeah, and yeah, so but basically also what was really interesting that that came up for us in this course was we came across the term lazy minting, which I'd never heard of before, which was where you, as the artist, put something on the blockchain, and no, most blockchain places don't do this. There's only a few, I think, and the timestamp doesn't get created until the first purchase. So you, as the creator, essentially don't have that timestamp. So it's been an interesting process, but basically that kind of brings us to us sitting here now. So this is kind of like where we're at in the process of thinking this through. So we're still kind of sorry. We're still kind of thinking through the ethics of blockchain, and whether, you know, whether we think that this is the right path, or what are the problems with it, and also like if there are problems, because we also don't want to be like sort of techno solutionists about this whole issue. Like what are the new issues? So if there are things like you know, if we're thinking about dancers, you know, who aren't academics and might not be reading about blockchain, but are told that this could be a form of proof that you own something, but you don't want to pay loads of money to mint an NFT, are there resources that tell you like these are the places that do lazy minting, and these are the, so, you know, we're kind of trying to build this knowledge up if this was a place that dancers do start using, which, and also some people are using blockchain for dance ownership already. It's like still in its early days, but there's a project called Dancing in the Streets, run by a guy that can't remember his name.
Sihalian Andrade.
Stihalian Andrales?
Andrade.
Andrade.
Yeah.
No, I won't say his name. I won't. But yeah, Dancing in the Streets.
It's beauty.
And there's sort of a Beauty in the Streets. I'm gonna write that down.
Well, the other easier one is like Meta Movers by Dylan Mayoral. They do basically.
Oh yeah. Beauty in the Streets. There we go. So there are people already doing it. It's not like, you know, something that we've just kind of thought up, and it is, you know, when we thought of it as a speculative thing, we were unaware that people are already starting to do it. So it is not as speculative as we thought it was.
Right. Maybe just to summarize some of these ideas about the sociality that we saw arising within the crypto community, that it's already using NFTs to tokenize their own embodied creativity. This sociality involves, as opposite or in contrast to previous communities that had already emerged through other platforms, non-crypto platforms like YouTube, where people already were circulating the recordings of their dances or the choreography. This new iteration, this new community, this new sociality that is emerging uh, in these crypto spaces has a heightened sense of stewardship, an interest in ownership, or authorship, or demarcating authorship very strictly through NFTs. People that don't know, and something that we also should clarify in this presentation, is that the claim that NFTs could have a potential to establish your ownership is because the NFT has embedded in it a timestamp. This timestamp is the proof that at any given moment in any particular date and hour, you uploaded a particular content into the blockchain. And so with that proof, people are claiming ownership over several kinds of content on the internet, especially in the Web3, which is part of what we're talking about. And even the World Intellectual Property Organization has itself its own service for people to be able to put together their NFTs and obtain this proof of uploading your content to the internet. And so this sociality involves stewardship, a heightened sense of interest in ownership or demarcating authorship, and a sense of community, that it's the how we are reinforcing and establishing these other 2 points in a social manner, and not necessarily through the centralized and legal way that intellectual property regimes usually operate from. Right?
Yeah, and I think if I'm sure that there might be more blockchain related questions at the end, because it is quite a difficult concept to wrap your head around, which we are also in the process of doing. The way that NFTs work is that the best way to think of it is like it's artist editions or collectibles. So there'll usually be a certain amount of NFTs or editions of one work that then will be produced when you mint it. And so you can't add more to it. Or actually, I don't know if you can. I don't think you can.
You can.
No, you can't.
Which is bringing back the sense of the scarcity to the digital era, right?
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said for the exact same way that these video games or online platforms work. These dances are also collectibles. And I don't know about the scarcity, but like this is a framework that I'm sure that these big companies probably don't care to incorporate, but it could be a something that is incorporated into these games, because it already functions in a really similar way. Perhaps there might not be collectibles, but video game companies could almost make more money like essentially if things were scarce, and if dancers were already kind of making it within these frameworks, video games could cash in on it as well. I mean, they kind of already are cashing in on dances anyways, but it's something that could very easily be that could slot in to these frameworks.
And just very quickly, Nina, I think it's interesting what you're saying, because it's like clarifying what kind of scarcity are we talking about, because I feel like the notion of scarcity and collectibles are like very close to each other, and this is how the whole blockchain and art combination started to blow up. Because before that, what you could copy and paste the images of the art that you're interested in an infinite amount of times. Whereas the moment that we started having this wave of NFTization of art, it was precisely because all of a sudden you could claim that, yes, you can copy and paste that image as many times as you want, but this is the original one, and I have the timestamp to prove it. So it's like bringing again the notion of the original and the notion of like scarcity. It's only 50 official NFTs attached to this image. Yes, some other people might copy and reproduce it and send it, but those are not attached to an NFT. It's only 50, which brings back the notion of like the collectible. So you might collect this ones, and these are like the authorized ones, right?
Yeah. Let's move on to the next slide, which is actually our sort of closing comments from Jorge.
So I was just thinking of how, yes, it's important for me to clarify that I am making that distinction between dance and data, not in a belittling way, but actually to come up with like more suitable or creative ways in which we can protect, appreciate, and circulate dances, embodied creativity, and be able to have communities of practitioners have a heightened sense of agency in the way in which their practices are being sold or not. And so within this framework, I started thinking through the emergence of the data body, which is something that has been theorized already by Harmony Bench or Ravetto Viaggioli at UCLA. And they are talking about this new body, this data body that is producing flows of data knowingly or unknowingly, like while we walk in, while we engage with our devices. And this is the data that it's being constantly archived, seen, observed, and utilized and instrumentalized. But more prominently, this body in particular, this data body and the data that resembles dance that it's producing does not does not need to be archived anymore because it's that archiving itself as it emerges. And in this intersection of dance being archived or performance art being archived, I am thinking of the early 2000s big debates in the academic field of theater studies and performance studies when, yeah, different scholars, Peggy Bell and most saliently, they were interested and kind of concerned of how the digitization of performance art is already something else, right? And so they were like very invested in clarifying that having a photo or a video of a performance is not the performance in itself, and how that whole tension, that whole concern was not only about the ontology of performance, of like describing what is it, what is performance and what is not performance, or what is live action and what is not live action, but rather more it was at the debate in itself was like a temperature check on our concerns of the neoliberalization of the archive, the neoliberalization of technology, where everyone in a decentralized way we can like create our own, curate, digitize, and archive the dances that we're interested in. And of course, even though I feel tempted to keep describing the cases that we are analyzing and studying today of dance in the blockchain, dance and the metaverse, dance as data, to keep thinking through the lens of neoliberalism, I do think that neoliberalism falls short to account for all the things that we have in front of us with these new iterations of dance and data. And I became interested, and maybe, yeah, we won't have to unpack all the notions or all the content of new frameworks, more accurate frameworks to assess this. But I did wanted to mention like maybe techno-feudalism or vectorialism, the first one by Yanis Varoufakis and the second one by Mackenzie Work, because these are two frameworks that are precisely ascribing or highlighting the role of new technologies in the way in which we are organizing ourselves in a cultural, economic, social way. And I thought that this accent that these people are putting on the role of new technology might be more suitable to see at what we have in front of us. I will end by saying that the reason why I think this is relevant is because neoliberalism will allow us, or the lens of neoliberalism will allow us to read this situation, the circulation of embodied creativity, because it brings forward or because it highlights the informalization of finance. But the portion that we are not assessing through that lens, and that is why I think that we need more frameworks to study it, is because we are not accounting for the financialization of information, which is the other side of the coin of what we are studying today, specifically for the sake of the case of dance, right?
Right. We are only 4 minutes over.
Woo!
So I realized if we don't show the other film, I added an extra 10 minutes on. So we only went 4 minutes over.
You see, this is exactly why I like recording myself, because I feel like the juices need to start flowing. You need to start like making the connections between one slide and the other, one idea and the other. What do you
Yeah.
how do you feel? What do you think of the whole?
I feel fine. Are you, do you, but the only thing is I'm worried, do you